0 Charisma, Phandelver and Below. Act 1. The Lost Mine. Written by Jerry Talsma. Narrated and voice-acted by Jerry Talsma and others. Chapter 1. Beginnings. The day had started off as most did. Maverith Avergaith, the bounty hunter, for that was the profession he had now taken up, had awoken from a fitful slumber in his lonesome cave hidden off somewhere in the Neverwinter wood. He had rekindled his fire, which had become little more than a smouldering pile of embers since the previous night, and on this fire he cooked his breakfast, some venison from the deer he had brought down yesterday. He had begun to think back to that kill, and that reminiscence took him further back in his mind to who he was before. Deadshot, they had called him. It was the way of his people, and indeed most Goliath clans, that every member of the clan be given a new name. These names were nicknames of sorts, but were more akin to a title by which they would be known to most. Oftentimes these names would reflect some great aspect of their character or some great deed they had achieved. His was the former. His father, a proud and respected man by the name of Maverith, was the greatest archer his clan had ever seen. Many believed he possessed some magical capabilities, or that he had perhaps been given a divine boon. But Maverith knew better. He grew up with his father. He trained with him. His father's skill was just that, skill, and he had intended to pass on every ounce of that skill to his son. In that endeavor, he had found considerable success. Maverith wasn't necessarily quite as quick with his shots or as skilled with his tricks, but he possessed a marksman's eye that could often outmatch even his own father, and so he earned his name. He was, to them, Deadshot. Better days. How quickly things had taken a turn for the worse on that one fateful day, but better not to dwell on it. Better to enjoy the deer meat and set out for the day, and that's exactly what he had done. So now he found himself trekking through the woods, debating what to do. The little bounties he picked up here and there weren't earning him much, and he hadn't been specifically sought after for any contracts yet. Of course, he didn't really need the money as much as most. He was completely self-sufficient in his little cave in the woods. However, mere self-sufficiency wouldn't be enough to get him back to his clan, and so the bounties were his best course, at least for the time being. It was a beautiful day out. Spring had come earlier than usual, and so the trees bore green leaves and the flowers were in bloom. He dug his toes into the soft dirt and felt the blades of dew-spotted grass tickling his ankles. He stood for a moment, enjoying the warmth and brightness of the world around him, warmth and brightness that his homeland up in the mountains sorely lacked. He did not idle for long, however. He was a hunter and a man of the wilds. Inactivity did not suit him. He allowed himself a second more, then set off into the woods, quiver slung across his back, bow in hand, ready for anything that he might come across. He still had much of the deer carcass left, so he had no need to search for food. However, the wilderness could be a dangerous place, and he needed to ensure he was ready for such dangers. For the most part, however, the woods sounded much the same as usual. The chirp of birds, the rustle of leaves, the sound of a horse-drawn cart on the nearby road. No, that last one wasn't the same as usual. It was not uncommon for carts to pass by, after all, that's what the road was there for, but it certainly wasn't a sound he heard every day. It was worth taking note of, at the very least. And indeed it was worth taking note of, for shortly thereafter he heard something far more unusual and far more noteworthy. The cart slowed, then stopped. He made his way to a small ledge overlooking the road, an embankment a little under 10 feet above the level the path was on, and observed. The cause of the cart's sudden stop was clear, for a tree had fallen across the road. It would have to be cleared away for the cart to pass, as the road was lined on either side with trees, preventing the cart from going around. He took a look over at the cart. Inside it sat 3 individuals, with a 4th holding the reins at the front. The 3 individuals in the back of the cart were all of dwarven descent, and appeared to be related, all boasting bright red hair and beards, as well as a similar facial structure, at least between 2 of them, though it was hard to tell whether the 3rd also bore that facial structure due to his jawline and cheekbones being hidden by layers of fat. Though similar in appearance, the dwarves by no means looked the same. Among them, only one wore armor, and sported a rough mane of red hair and a well-braided beard. He carried a wooden shield on his back with a red warhammer painted on it, and an axe hung at his side. The dwarf to his left, despite not sporting any armor, appeared a warrior as well. His hair, which was the darkest red of the trio, had been shaved into a short mohawk, and his beard was not well braided, instead just being pulled up into 3 bunches held in place by rings of metal. His skin was a tapestry of scars, some old and some quite new, and his hand rested on a large bronze-headed warhammer. The 3rd dwarf had a much different air about him. Where the others had the demeanors of fighters, he instead wore a tailored suit, though it looked like it had been tailored for somebody with a bit less meat on their bones. Indeed, the 3rd dwarf looked less like a dwarf and more like a ball that had been taught to walk, and though the suit looked quite professional and well kept, the buttons were being pushed to their limits, and a length of rope was being used in place of a belt. He sat tall, however, a friendly but reserved look on his flabby face, from which grew a short, well-kept beard which faded from red to grey. His short, combed hair was coloured similarly. The dwarves appeared to have been mid-conversation, though, following this sudden stop, the 2 more combat-versed dwarves had begun to look around, hands on their weapons, as the overweight one began to move to a safer position in the cart, just in case. The man at the front of the cart stepped down and began to approach the fallen tree. He was not a dwarf, like the others, but instead was a stern-looking human man. He appeared to be in his 50s or 60s, past his prime, though he had aged quite well. He wore a suit of well-polished armor, and a flowing red cape billowed down from a sizable fur mantle across his shoulders. His short, dark brown hair had begun to gray, and creases were beginning to form on his handsome face, which was only slightly obscured by a well-groomed goatee. He tightened the straps on his shield, which boasted a gold image of a crown on a red background, and drew from its sheath a perfectly polished arming sword as he approached the obstruction, head on a swivel. Deadshot looked closer at the tree blocking the path. Or rather, the log. This was no simple fallen tree, no unfortunate bit of bad luck for the group. This was a tree that had been intentionally cut down, trimmed up, and laid across the path. The human man came to the realization at the same time as Deadshot. This was an ambush. He turned and started back towards the cart, raising up his shield, but too late.
"Get down!"
he shouted, as a volley of crossbow bolts flew from within the trees towards the occupants of the cart. The human's decision to raise his shield had paid off for him, as it blocked a bolt that otherwise surely would have struck him in the jaw. The dwarves in the cart tried to shelter, though a bolt glanced off one of the pauldrons of the armored dwarf, and another buried itself in the shoulder of the fat dwarf, who sunk down clutching at the wound. Deadshot quickly rallied. He hadn't seen where all of the bolts had shot from, but he had noted some of the trajectories, and he knew this area well. His first shot arced over a large rock near the rear of the cart, and a shout of pain informed him that he had hit his mark. Sure enough, a shoddily dressed man stumbled out from behind the rock, clutching at an arrow that had embedded itself in his collarbone. He turned, firing his crossbow wildly in Deadshot's general direction, before falling to the ground, gasping as he bled out. Deadshot dropped down from the embankment he had situated himself on and started towards the cart as another volley of bolts flew from within the woods. By this point, the human had located one of the assailants, and shortly thereafter that assailant found himself wrapped around the warrior's sword. One of the other ambushers, however, had found a mark. His bolt struck one of the horses, which started and began trying to free itself from the cart. Deadshot spun towards the source of that bolt and loosed another arrow, which struck the bandit squarely between the eyes. 3 down. But how many more? The volleys had paused as the remaining ambushers seemingly were trying to reposition themselves. He would simply have to wait for the next one to emerge. As the human warrior turned to face him, gratitude and wariness in his expression, a sudden subtle shift in his face alerted Deadshot to a figure behind him, whose scimitar narrowly missed Deadshot's neck as he ducked out of the way. He turned to look at the assailant, a scruffy-looking middle-aged man with his dark hair pulled back into a ponytail and a mean look on his face. Deadshot returned his gaze with an even meaner look, pulling his battle axe off his back just in time to block another swing.
My turn,
he growled, his deep, rumbling voice scratching just a little bit from disuse. He hooked the axe blade around the scimitar and yanked, tearing the latter out of the man's hands, and then plunged the axe's head into the man's sternum, shattering his ribcage. The man fell forward with the axe's removal, expiring on the ground before Deadshot, who took no time to cherish the moment. He spun around, dropping his axe and knocking another arrow, which he fired between the arms of the human warrior to hit another ambusher that had been bearing down on him. As he reached back for another arrow, he called out to the man and the dwarves.
How many more are there?
As far as I can see, only 2,
replied the fat dwarf, though the sound of his reply was interrupted by the human bringing his blade down at another ambusher, who managed to parry 2 swings but was quickly dispatched as soon as he tried to retaliate.
Only 1 now.
To Deadshot's eyes, the dwarf seemed to be correct. Only 1 man was left standing. The final ambusher seemed to recognize he stood no chance as he dropped his weapons and turned to run. He wanted no part of this anymore. Deadshot aimed 1 last arrow.
"Let him go,"
said the human man. But Deadshot had already let the arrow fly. The final ambusher clutched at his throat, which now had the tip of an arrow sticking out of it, before he fell to his knees and then collapsed. The dwarves had begun to hop down from the cart, seeing that the danger had passed. The armored one, who had readied his axe but had not had a chance to join the fight, sheathed it once again as he approached Deadshot.
"Thanks for the help, lad. Can I ask your name?"
he said in a gruff voice, his hand outstretched. Ignoring the outstretched hand and instead striding over to retrieve his dropped battle axe, he replied,
The name's Maverith. What are you doing out here?
"Good to meet you, Maverith. I'm Gundren Rockseeker. These are my brothers, Tharden and Nundro, and this is Sildar Hallwinter, an old friend of mine. We're just on our way to Neverwinter. We've got some business there. Actually, that was quite the display. We're headed to Neverwinter in search of some folks to help us with the job we got. Sellsword types and the like, Could potentially use your help. You'd get paid well for it."
How much are we talking?
Deadshot asked, wiping gore off of his axe blade and returning it to his back.
"We're still working to figure out all we need, and how many folks we need to hire. Don't quite have a price set yet, but I can assure you that you'd be fairly compensated. What do you say? Any interest?"
Perhaps, if my pay is adjusted accordingly.
What do you mean by that?
My skills are a cut above the rest. It stands to reason that my cut should be greater than the rest.
Well, I'll see what I can do. You seem the capable sort, and I'd appreciate your help, but I don't exactly know how much more I could realistically pay you. Tell you what, I'll talk to Tharden about throwing on an additional service fee at 2 gold pieces more for you, and, I sure as shit hope nobody else wants to haggle on their wages.
Deadshot considered it. 2 gold wasn't really much of a bonus, and he needed the money more than he cared to admit, unless he wanted to live meal to meal in the woods for the rest of his life. However, he also didn't want to look desperate, and haggling any more might just lose him the job altogether.
Deal. Now, Do you need some help lifting that log out of the road?
The scarred dwarf with a mohawk, Nundro, called out a reply to this one as he was already working on moving the log.
Aye, sure. That'd be a help, lad.
Deadshot strode over and offered up his assistance. With his hulking stature and the dwarf's trained muscles, the two made quick work of the log.
Thanks for the help, laddie. Whoa.
Sure.
Deadshot said, turning around and starting for the horse that had been hit. He stopped when he saw that the human, Sildar, as Gundren had named him, was already tending to it. Nundro pushed past him back towards the cart as Gundren and his fat brother Tharden approached.
I'll be getting everyone who'll be joining the job together in a 10-day in the Ragged Ring. It's a tavern in Neverwinter. You know it?
Gundren asked.
No.
Deadshot replied.
But I'm sure I can find it.
All right. Well, thanks again for the help.
Would you like to ride with us to Neverwinter?
Tharden asked.
It's quite a walk, and you don't seem to have a cart.
No.
Answered Deadshot, before turning around and walking back into the woods.
Well, I guess we'll see you then.
Gundren called after him. Deadshot gave no response. As he slowly made his way through the streets of Neverwinter, Dennis struggled to imagine how this day could be going any worse. He was sure it could. It wasn't the weather that was challenging him, simply the how. He supposed the city could have burned down around him, or some deranged lunatic could have gone on a killing spree. But then again, would that really have been worse? At least there's some comfort in that there's a familiarity to that. Awful as either of those would be, they're understandable. They make sense. That was the worst part of what had happened to him. He couldn't make heads or tails of it. There simply was no logical explanation as far as he could tell. He came to a tavern. He noted the name, the Ragged Ring, but he didn't particularly care. He didn't care whether he was walking into the seediest dump in Neverwinter or the greatest tavern on the Sword Coast. He just needed a drink. Something to calm him down. As he opened the doors, he found it to be a place of decent repute, though certainly not the kind of place he'd ever have visited before. The Ragged Ring was a sizable tavern, with 2 common rooms divided by a large circular fighting ring, which he supposed was from where the tavern derived its name. The common room he entered seemed to be the primary of the 2, with a good-sized bar, several tables, a door to the kitchen, and a stairwell leading up to the upper floor. In addition to the tables, which each had a little decorative brazier in the center, there were several seats near the fighting ring, so that people could watch fights while they drank. Dennis paid little mind to the ring and the matchup that was currently taking place within, instead walking straight to the bar and claiming one of the stools. He raised his hand in greeting to the bartender as she approached, a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length blonde hair messily swept back, as if the only combing it ever really got was from her fingers. She, like all the staff at the Ragged Ring, wore a simple set of shoddy armor over a dull red outfit. Dennis doubted the armor was actually any good.
"Hello there,"
he said.
"Dennis el Remedios Cipriano de la Santisima Ruiz y Picasso III. Pleasure to meet you."
"Hello,"
replied the bartender.
"Me never living and the pleasure's all mine. Quite the name you got there, Mr. Dennis. What can I get ya?"
"Well, I'm a bit parched. Looking to get some tea,"
Dennis said hopefully.
"You're walking into a bar and ordering tea?"
Mila questioned.
"You don't serve tea here?"
he asked, incredulous.
"I mean, this ain't exactly,"
she began, before Dennis interrupted her.
"In my part of the city, it's served at every bar I've ever been to, but I can make do with an ale. That works. Hot, please?"
"I'm sorry. A hot ale?"
"Yes, just boil a bit of water, put the cup of ale over top of it, double boil, hot ale into a cup. I'll pay extra if that's too much trouble."
Mila hesitated for a moment.
"Call it a gold piece."
"A gold piece? My heavens."
Dennis exclaimed, before reluctantly fishing out a gold piece and placing it on the bar. Mila reached across and took it, then headed back through the door into the kitchen. Dennis glanced around the common room. Most people's attention was focused on the fight going on in the ring, but by this point he had drawn the attention of quite a few patrons. He supposed this was unsurprising, given the manner in which his appearance had been altered earlier that day. He wasn't quite sure how it happened, but it had happened at the same time as all this other foul business had begun. His curly black hair had grown out into a lavender afro, which, thankfully, at least complemented his fine purple suit, and his front teeth had grown considerably larger. In years past, he had thought his purple suit to look quite smart. Now, however, it simply seemed to complement the utter lunacy that was his appearance. Even his monocle, the possession he was proudest of, seemed like a silly accessory now. And not to mention the bright purple and pink sword he now had slung across his back. He knew not how it had come into his possession. The only thing he did know about it was that its name was Basil, and he wasn't even sure how he knew that. He once had considered himself a handsome fellow. Now he wished all of these patrons would turn around and go back to their own business. At least there weren't many. It was still early in the evening, so the rowdy night crowd hadn't made their way in yet. Dennis supposed if he was going to have an audience anyways, he may as well entertain them. He pulled out his little pocket flute and began to play. Or, rather, he began to try to play. He had once been quite good, even performing for a small audience a few times. However, suddenly growing buck teeth tends to throw off one's ability to play a woodwind instrument, and after around 10 seconds of unpleasant blowing and squeaking sounds, he quickly stowed it away, turning away from the jeers and mockery of his few spectators, quickly glancing apologetically towards the woman who had stood up to head over to the second common room to escape his playing. He looked down at the bar, examining the scratches and stains of spilled beer. He had never really had much of an appreciation for rough-and-tumble places like this, but looking at the scuffs, scrapes, and carved-in names, he couldn't help but wonder how many stories this bar would have to tell if it could talk. He traced his finger along a char mark that he assumed was from a spill from the nearby brazier. He accidentally dragged a gloved finger through a recent food spill and pulled it away, wiping it off on the stool next to him. The sound of the front door opening again drew his attention, and he turned to see a familiar face walking in, alongside some not-so-familiar ones. Gundren Rockseeker, a dwarf he had befriended a few years back, came through the door, accompanied by a couple of other dwarves he didn't recognize, as well as an older-looking human man. Dennis tried to turn his face away. He didn't want them to see him like this. Unfortunately, they had already seen him, and even if they hadn't, he was the most colorful person in the room. They would have noticed him before too long.
Dennis? Is that you?
Gundren called to him as he made his way over.
Hello, Gundren. Long time no see.
Dennis replied sheepishly. Gundren turned towards his companions.
Oh, this is me old friend Dennis. Dennis something Picasso the Third. Where have you been?
He asked as he turned back to Dennis.
It's a long story, but if you have a moment.
Dennis began before he was interrupted.
Pleasure to finally meet you, my good sir,
said the first and fatter of his dwarven companions, pushing forward to grasp his hand.
The pleasure is all mine, though my full name does not include something. Dennis Remedios Cipriano de la Santisima Ruiz y Picasso III. A friend of Gundren is a friend of mine.
Dennis replied.
Brother, actually. Tharden Rockseeker at your service.
The dwarf answered.
Oh, a brother. The resemblance, it's uncanny. It's uncanny. You two are exactly alike. No discernible differences here. None at all.
Dennis answered.
Oh, come now, don't be so unkind to Gundren.
Tharden replied with a chuckle, patting his vast stomach.
He hasn't let himself grow quite so much.
The other dwarf, this one with a mohawk and a good many scars, came up as well.
Well, we're introducing ourselves, laddie. My name's Nundro, and I'm the other brother of these two.
Oh, is this other one your brother as well? Are they all your brothers?
Asked Dennis.
He's a human, you ninny.
Answered Nundro.
Nah,
Agreed Gundren.
ain't got any human brothers. He's just an old friend, an associate of mine.
Sildar Hallwinter, at your service.
The man said, grasping Dennis's hand in a firm handshake.
Your friend is working on a project and has hired me on for protection. He chose me for a reason. Remember that, should you get any ideas.
Come on, Sildar, he's a friend. There's no reason for threats.
Gundren said.
When an individual presents themselves in such an odd fashion, I often find it harder to trust them. I'm merely being cautious.
Sildar replied.
I was wondering about that, actually.
Said Gundren.
What with the get-up?
Dennis began.
Oh!
Interrupted Gundren.
Speaking of protection jobs, I got a shipment coming that I need some people to escort and protect, since I'll be out of town when it gets here. I could use the help of someone I trust, if you're interested.
You know me. I've never been much for violence, but have you gotten...
I wouldn't worry about it.
Said Gundren.
If all goes well, shouldn't even be any violence. It's just a precaution.
Have you received my letter?
Finished Dennis.
When'd you think he'd have gotten your letter, laddie?
Asked Nundro.
We've been on the road for months. It's exactly easy to deliver a letter to travelling folk.
Oh, I hadn't realized. I thought you were still in town.
Answered Dennis, a little confused.
We were supposed to meet in a few days, were we not?
My good man, that was...
Began Tharden, but he was interrupted by Mila, who had returned with Dennis's drink.
Here you are.
She said, setting the steaming mug of ale down in front of him.
Ah, thank you.
He replied.
Anything else for ya?
No, that will be all.
He turned back to the group before him.
Bar lady, barkeep, ma'am.
Gundren said, catching her attention before she left.
Aye.
She said, turning back around.
Could we get a round of drinks? And, have you got a private room anywhere here where we could talk and catch up away from prying ears and loud conversation?
Sure, but you gotta pay extra for it. The room, that is, not the drinks. You'll still have to pay for them too, though.
You good for it?
Gundren asked, turning to Tharden.
Certainly. I'll cover the cost for tonight. Don't you worry about it.
Tharden replied.
Right then. 3 gold and the room's all yours. Right through that door over there.
Mila said.
Another 2 for the round of drinks, so 5 in all.
Tharden pulled 5 gold pieces out of his coin purse and handed them over, and Mila grabbed a key from under the counter and handed it to him.
I'll bring the drinks to ya. Just head on in.
Much obliged,
said Dennis, as the group made their way towards the door she indicated. Dennis paused for a moment when he heard Nundro shouting,
Yeah, fuck her, bloody, that's the way.
He turned to look and saw that Nundro was calling to one of the fighters in the ring. He craned his head a bit to see past one of the pillars, and saw that the current matchup was pitting a tattooed dwarven man against a half-orc woman with particularly long tusks.
Seems a bit of an unfair matchup,
Dennis commented.
She's got at least 2 feet of height on him.
Oh, you think that's unfair? You clearly ain't never seen dwarf fighting, laddie.
Nundro replied.
2 feet ain't gonna mean nothing when it breaks her legs.
You're assuming this dwarf is as trained and capable as proper dwarven fighters.
Sildar interjected.
I've known many capable dwarven warriors in my time, but I've also known some who could scarcely lift a hammer.
Oh, you're off your rocker, laddie.
Nundro replied.
I ain't met a dwarf who wasn't born with a hammer in hand. And either way, that lad ain't using a hammer, just his two bare fists.
I suppose we'll see.
Dennis said.
Not if the fight ends while we're still talking in here, we won't.
Gundren pointed out, holding open the door to the private room.
True enough.
Dennis conceded, following the dwarves in, with Sildar bringing up the rear and closing the door behind him. The room was nothing special, essentially just an extension of the common room, but with a wall and a door between. It contained a single table, around which sat a handful of chairs, enough for the group plus a couple extra. Gundren turned towards Dennis once they were all situated.
You mentioned something about a letter.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis affirmed, nodding.
So, I had written you a letter, I wrote you a letter, sorry, a couple of weeks ago. It may have gotten lost in travel, or you have been on the road, either or.
Couple weeks ago.
Nundro scoffed.
Don't think so, laddie.
Dennis stammered, a bit put off by his response.
I mean, I may have the date a little bit off. Time's been rough for me recently, but around then.
Dennis, buddy, just how rough?
Gundren asked.
It's been years.
Yes,
Dennis paused.
Years? I thought it was a little less than years, but okay.
He laughed.
Less than years. Dennis, I didn't even see you at your old man's funeral. And that wasn't exactly yesterday.
Gundren said. There was a long pause as Dennis processed what had just been said. As he realized what he had heard, he read into Gundren's face, trying to find some hidden smile, some twitch of the eyebrow, some tell that this was a joke. As Gundren remained stone-faced, however, Dennis's face dropped, his mouth slightly agape.
My father. He's dead? My father's dead?
He spluttered, horrified.
Aye. He died a year or two ago.
Gundren answered.
You weren't there. Did you not know? It's been like 2 or 3 years since you've...
2 or 3 years?
Dennis shouted.
I've been gone for a day, or 2 or 3. It's time has been very rough on me. I'm very confused, so sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to start from the beginning. I was out walking one day, just walking, taking a walk. This was maybe a couple of days ago or earlier today. I don't know. Everything recently has been very foggy. But I was walking and I saw a very beautiful flower. Mesmerizing, even. It was unlike anything I had seen before. And you know me, I love nature, and I wanted to put it in my scrapbook, because I had never seen a flower like this before. It was only as tall as a dandelion, but it was beautiful as a daffodil. I do not know. It was very beautiful.
Nundro chuckled at Dennis's description.
Those D flowers, eh, laddie?
Yes, I don't know how quite to better describe it. It was very beautiful.
Dennis responded, before continuing.
And I had never seen anything like it before. I thought it could have been, I don't know, created by something, but it seemed unnatural. So I wanted it, of course. So I reached down, I picked it up, and the next thing I know, I'm surrounded by these flowers, and I'm in a different space, and I'm in a forest almost. It was like nature, but I don't know, it was very surreal, and I felt very, very nauseous, and confused, and lost, and I did not know where I was. I tried to go back to my home, and the trail was no longer there.
Dennis took a breath to steel himself before continuing, but as he opened his mouth to resume his story, the door to their room opened and Mila walked through, carrying a round of drinks for the group.
Here's your drinks. Oh, sorry, am I interrupting?
No. Thank you,
said Dennis, grateful for the interruption to break the tension.
Indeed, thank you very much, ma'am.
added Sildar.
Might I also request a bite to eat? Perhaps a bowl of that traveller's stew you do so well.
I'll get right on that, sir.
She replied as she distributed the tankards around the table.
Anything else you need?
No. I think that will be all, madam. Thank you kindly,
answered Tharden, pulling out a couple of copper pieces.
Here, for the man's stew.
Alrighty. Well, if you do end up needing anything, just let me know,
she said, taking the coins from the dwarf and heading towards the door.
Thank you, again,
said Dennis as she left, almost hoping to keep her a little longer. She left, though, and so the time came for him to return to his tale.
Where was I? As I tried to find my home, I realized I am nowhere near anywhere I had ever been before. The sky, it was beautiful. A permanent twilight, a tapestry of pinks and purples, and I cannot find the words to describe it in the common language. I do not have the words to describe this place. I do not know. The plants and the creatures I saw, and they saw me. I was scared for my life, and then the next thing I know, I'm back, and the flower's gone, and I'm back on the trail, and I head home, and it's been taken over. My home had been taken over. They had seized my home. What has happened?
Well, see, the thing is...
Gundren started, clearly reeling from Dennis's story.
Something weird definitely happened with you, but see, the thing is, right? Your father died a year ago. You've been missing for 3...
I'm sorry,
Dennis interrupted.
But I cannot just take your word for that. I need to... I cannot take your word for that.
Mr. Picasso, if I may...
Tharden began, hoping to calm him at least a little, enough to perhaps explain the situation. Dennis, however, wasn't ready to have reality confirmed. Not yet.
My father was in perfect health,
he stated firmly, as if that dissuaded any arguments.
Be that as it may...
Tharden tried again.
Perfect health!
Dennis shouted, leaping to his feet as he cut Tharden off again. For a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Nundro broke the silence.
Here, laddie, you remember when you were supposed to meet us? How Gundren was going to introduce you to us, and was going to go out and get some drinks and some laughs and all?
That's not for a few days yet,
Dennis replied.
Try years, laddie,
Nundro said.
And not yet. 3 years ago.
3?
Dennis began.
No, that's impossible.
Your father died a year ago,
Tharden explained.
And with you nowhere to be found, well, the lords of the city, they reclaimed your property and your fortune, and put it back into the vaults of the city.
But that's not theirs! That's not mine! That's my father's! That's my father's!
Dennis shouted, furious.
Clearly ain't either of theirs, laddie,
answered Nundro.
Seeing as they're both dead.
I need a moment,
Dennis said, leaning against the table, head hung.
So, you're telling me that I was gone, just missing for 3 years? My father has died, I've lost all my belongings, and I have nothing to my name? I am no longer nobility?
That about sums it up, laddie,
Nundro said, finishing off his drink, and, seeing that the drink before Dennis remained untouched, pulled it over to him and began to drink that one.
Oh, heavens, I need...
He sunk back into his chair, defeated.
This, I simply cannot. This is too much to bear. You mentioned something about a protection job.
Everyone looked at him, confused, completely caught off guard by this sudden redirection. After a moment, Gundren slowly nodded. Dennis needed something to distract himself. The Rockseeker brothers could provide that.
I have a shipment of supplies that I need delivered somewhere,
he answered.
We'll be on our way by the time the shipment is ready, so I need some people to escort it. I trust you, so I'd appreciate having you along. Wage of 10 gold pieces per person is what we're looking at.
Only 10 gold pieces?
Dennis scoffed.
It could help you get back on your feet, at least.
Sildar interjected, and Dennis's face fell with the realization.
Oh, yes, I suppose. I only have around 20 on me, and, I suppose that's all I have to my name now.
Dennis said.
So, 10 gold pieces, then. I can work with 10 gold pieces, and you're a good friend of mine. I will lend my help.
Well, the plan is to meet up here on the 25th with all the folks that'll be taking the job.
Gundren explained.
That's, 8 days from now. Right. Well, with that out of the way, lads, I'ma see that fight at there ended.
Nundro said, getting up.
Wouldn't mind throwing me own hat in the ring.
Good luck,
said Tharden, though had Nundro caught his disapproving glance, it would have been clear he didn't mean his words. As soon as Nundro had left the room, Sildar slid Dennis's now mostly empty tankard back over to him, and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder.
You'd think that man would have a little more tact. I'm sorry, young man. I can't imagine what you're feeling.
Another round, perhaps?
Asked Tharden.
Some drinks with which to remember the old days?
Some drinks.
Corrected Dennis, sullenly.
With which to forget them.
Many will tell you that evocation is the most dangerous school of magic. This is not the case. While evocation is indeed quite volatile and is capable of causing considerable destruction, there is safety in its predictability. No matter how many bolts of lightning you summon, no matter how many balls of fire you hurl, you will see no variation in their manifestation, so long as the incantations are properly performed.
Craig nodded. His instructor, Crenan Hale, had touched briefly on this topic in the past. The man was a human, tall and thin, with a pale face, bony cheeks, a pointed, well-kept beard, and a round pair of brass-rimmed glasses resting atop his crooked nose. The very model of a scholarly professor, and quite unlike Craig himself in appearance. While one would be unsurprised, and in fact would quite expect to see the likes of Crenan Hale teaching the arts of wizardry, the likes of Craig would certainly give one pause if seen learning it. He was, after all, a hobgoblin. His ruddy orange skin was complemented by his bright amber irises, which stood out against his black sclerae. His pen, which he dipped in his ink bottle and used to jot down a quick note in his journal, was situated between clawed fingers. His hair was done up in a traditional style for his kind, pulled back into a tight knot, and with mutton chops framing his face. Two things set his appearance apart from that of the rest of his kind. First, rather than the natural dark hair that most hobgoblins possessed, Craig's hair was dyed a bright sky blue. Second, rather than wearing armor and weaponry, he wore the uniform of a member of the Wardens of the Continuum of his status, that being an initiate, a disciple of the Continuum. The uniform consisted of a black overshirt of twisting and swirling design, which flowed back into a long, flowing coat tail, as well as black pants and high black boots that reached his knees. The black of the uniform was cut by flowing and twisting lines of white, the color of an initiate. Once he earned his place within his chosen subset of the Wardens of the Continuum, that subset being the Wardens of Chronergy, his uniform would take on the coppery color that went with that role. Craig looked back up at Crenan, who had taken a brief moment's pause to allow Craig to write down what he had said.
Now, Craig, Can you tell me what school of magic is the most dangerous?
Krenin asked. Craig had been waiting for this question. He knew the answer well. Krenin had mentioned it a few times, and beyond that, it simply stood to reason that it would be the topic of the lecture. After all, it was the very school of magic he was studying.
Chronergy,
he answered confidently. Krenin gave a nod of affirmation.
Very good,
he said.
You have indeed been paying attention. Or perhaps you simply made an informed guess. Can you tell me why chronergy is the most dangerous?
It's volatile.
Craig offered.
Unpredictable.
This seemed the right answer, given the content of Krenin's previous spiel.
A rather simplistic answer, Craig, but accurate for the most part,
Krenin replied.
Chronergy is dangerous because, while every other school of magic has next to no end of rules that they must abide by, chronergy has not but a handful, and it doesn't even follow them consistently. Sometimes it may not even follow those rules the same with 2 castings of the same spell. It is impossible to alter the present by changing the past, except when it isn't. Sometimes one can travel into the future and see an accurate depiction of what is to come, but sometimes one is torn asunder and dragged across billions of different possible futures, scattered and lost to time, or trapped in a branching timeline from which they can never be recovered. Sometimes changes to time can be noticed, and sometimes it's merely as though the original act that was changed never took place at all. One can find ways to project oneself through time, but to fully rewind or accelerate time for the entire world is an impossibility, except that it has been done before. Chronergy is unknowable, unpredictable, and nigh unmasterable. Only a handful of individuals throughout the entire history of the world, both past and future, have ever found or ever will find a way to harness it to its full extent. If you take nothing else away from my lesson today, take this. Stick to minor alterations and simpler spells. Learn the others, but strive never to need to use them. Otherwise there is no telling what horrors you may suffer. Oh, good day, Xarric.
Craig turned around. The door to the room had opened without him hearing, and leaning against the doorway was Xarric, the right-hand man of the Master of Chronergy within the Wardens, Master Valzori. Xarric was a tall, muscular half-orc man with a chiseled face, carved cheekbones, yellow eyes, and a short-cut brown mohawk. His mouth was bent into a casual smile, slightly out of shape due to the tusks jutting from his jaw. He gave a friendly nod.
I hope I'm not interrupting,
he said, his voice rich and deep, with each word carefully enunciated. Xarric was a man who believed himself above his orcish heritage, and he took care to ensure that all could see it. He refused to allow a single word to be muddled or mispronounced due to his tusks.
You are, I'm afraid,
Krenin responded, slightly annoyed to have his lesson interrupted, but still maintaining a friendly tone. He knew better than to challenge Xarric's authority.
But I suppose there's nothing to be done about it. What can I help you with?
Oh, actually, I don't need anything from you right now, Hale,
Xarric answered.
I'm here for Craig. Master Valzori wants to talk to you.
Craig sat silent for a moment, caught off guard. Of course, he had met with Master Valzori before. She was the leader of the Wardens of Chronergy, and was one of the most capable chronergists in all of history. He would be remiss if he hadn't taken what chances he could to speak with her and learn from her. However, a meeting with her was certainly not common, and even less so was her sending her closest advisor to seek him out for a meeting.
Craig?
Xarric prompted, pulling him out of his thoughts.
I know she can manipulate time, but you still oughtn't keep her waiting.
Apologies,
Craig answered.
What does she want to speak to me about?
I don't know,
Xarric answered.
She wouldn't tell me. Something about the importance of secrecy to ensure everything plays out correctly. Only one way to find out.
Well, I suppose you must.
said Krenin, beginning to put away the materials he had brought along for Craig's lesson and motioning for Craig to do the same. Craig followed his lead, closing up his journal, capping his ink bottles, and stuffing them both into his bag, along with his pen and a few other loose papers. He stood up and began to walk towards the door.
Thank you, Krenin. I look forward to our next lesson,
he said as he followed Xarric out the door.
As do I, my boy, as do I,
Krenin replied.
However, it may be some time before we meet again if Master Velzori has a task for you.
Much of this went unheard by Craig, however, for as soon as he had stepped through the door, Xarric pulled it shut behind him. Craig made his way through the halls of the Academy wing of the Piano Nobile, the first floor of the Felspire. This floor was by far the most normal floor of the tower, though it still wouldn't be quite accurate to describe it as such. When approached from the outside, the Felspire looked like an ordinary, simple, albeit extremely tall, circular tower. Well, when it came into view, that is. The tower was protected by a number of magical wards, several of which made it very difficult to perceive. It only became visible when a person came within a certain distance of it, and even then it was protected by powerful distractor spells, making it so that it could only really be noticed if a person was specifically focusing on it and trying to make their way towards it. An unassuming passerby, even one close enough to see the tower, would just travel right on past it without even knowing it was there. Upon entering the tower, things only became stranger. Despite the tower's outward appearance, that being a simple circular structure around 70 feet across, the interior did not reflect that in the slightest. Walking through the front entrance, one would find themselves in a simple square room. A door stood at the center of each wall, and in the center of the room sat a desk behind which at all times was the greeter, seated and waiting for new arrivals. The door on the left wall led to the dormitories, in which a great many of the wardens resided. Some chose to live elsewhere, of course. Those with families tended to live with them, and some just preferred living in a house of their own rather than within the Felspire. Most of the initiates, at least, chose to live in the dormitories, so as to be more available while they trained and awaited their ceremony of colors. Craig was among those initiates, though, even if he hadn't that motivation, he had nowhere else to live anyways. The door on the back wall of the entry room led to the spire circles. Due to the unnatural nature of the tower, a standard staircase to travel between floors would be impractical on the best of floors and just plain impossible on the rest. As such, each floor had its own corresponding spire circle. An individual could step onto the circle associated with their desired floor, and it would transport them to the matching circle on that floor, which could then be used to travel back to the first floor. Finally, the rightmost door of the front room led to the Academy wing. There, the wardens who possessed the most skill and knowledge would pass on that knowledge to initiates seeking to enter their respective sects of the organization. It was from this door that Xarric now emerged, with Craig following behind. As the pair came into the room, the greeter turned its head towards them. It was an odd thing, which Craig still didn't quite know the true nature of. It was a semi-transparent, solid black humanoid form, standing at exactly 7 feet tall, with no real discernible facial features, hair, ears, fingernails, or anything else of the like. Its form looked as though it was wearing a uniform of the Wardens, though, like the rest of its body, the uniform was mostly transparent and lacked any texture or detail aside from the patterns found on all of the uniforms, which, in the greeter's case, were white, although were almost completely invisible due to their transparency. Aside from the apparent uniform, the only discernible detail of the greeter was found on its face. Though the rest of the greeter's body was a transparent black, its face sported 2 large circles of white, roughly where eyes might be found on a human.
Greetings, Xarric. Greetings, Craig.
It intoned as the pair came through the door. Its voice was unlike any Craig had heard from any other living being. The greeter spoke in a dull, monotonous drone, with carefully accentuated syllables and an odd, gravelly nature. The closest thing he could liken it to was the sound of a coin rolling across a hardwood floor.
How are you, greeter?
Craig asked, following Xarric to the desk.
I am as I always am. By what process may I assist the two of you today?
The greeter asked.
We don't need anything much from you today. Craig and I are just passing through, headed up to the Hall of Time to speak with Master Valzori.
Xarric answered.
Passage to the Hall of Time may be found by way of the Chronergy Spire Circle within the room behind me.
I am well aware, greeter. Thank you for your time,
Xarric said, gently slapping his hand against the desk as he leaned away from it and strode towards the door on the back wall.
Pleasure as always,
Craig said, nodding to the greeter before following his escort. It returned the nod before returning to its original position. Craig paused. He had always assumed the greeter to be some sort of magically programmed construct, perhaps an unseen servant spell given form and voice or something of the like. However, that one small motion had thrown off everything he had thought. That wasn't an acknowledgement of a command. That wasn't a programmed motion of dismissal. That was a nod of friendly recognition. Craig hadn't the time to dwell on this development, though. Xarric had already walked through the door by that point, and had turned to look back expectantly at him from the room beyond, and so Craig shook off his thoughts and continued on. Stepping onto the spire circle with a coppery glow, the pair found themselves standing within the floor of the felspire belonging to the Wardens of Chronergy, the Hall of Time. Craig had been here a number of times in the past. It was, after all, the floor belonging to his chosen sect, but it never failed to take his breath away. The Hall of Time was not so much a hall as it was a giant ring. The floor curved up and away in either direction from where they stood, forming one giant circuit, yet no matter where one stood on the ring, the ground was always beneath their feet. The Hall of Time had no walls to speak of. The ring simply seemed to float within a boundless void. Craig knew not what might happen if one were to fall off the edge, for he dared not ever test it himself. The sides of the ring were not featureless, however. Spaced evenly on either side of the circuitous hallway, around 25 feet between each, were archways filled with a sheen of coppery light. Each side had 12 of these archways, amounting to 24 in total. Each archway had its own purpose and led to its own destination, though Craig had only stepped through a handful of them. The first time he had done so, he had worried he would simply step through and fall off the edge of the ring, but he was relieved to find that passing through them simply transported him somewhere new. This was all very well and good, of course, the magical floating ring with unnatural gravity in the middle of an endless expanse of nothingness, but that alone was not enough to astonish. The true marvel of the Hall of Time was its centerpiece. Floating in the exact center of the ring, always directly overhead no matter where one stood, was a giant hourglass, the Immemorian. To reduce it down to such a simplistic description, though, does nothing to convey the absolute majesty of the thing. Each end of the hourglass was capped by a teardrop-shaped structure composed of a shining coppery metal embossed with intricate patterning, some of which continued onto the chambers of the hourglass. Crafted from a gorgeous indigo glass, the chambers were connected not by one, but by 4 thinner tubes at the center, each with its own unique swirling, spiraling shape. It was not sand that traveled between these chambers, but rather glowing pinpricks of light, as if the entire sky had been gathered up and contained therein. Craig couldn't help but stop and watch the oscillations of the Immemorian for a moment, watching in wonder as motes of light slowly traveled back and forth from one chamber of the hourglass to the other. He knew generally what the thing represented. It was a display of the flow of time. However, he had yet to learn what exactly its movements meant. As he looked on, he couldn't help but wonder if one of those little pinpricks of light might represent him. It was certainly a humbling thought, seeing the billions upon billions of little sparks contained within, but the idea still gave him comfort. It would mean that, however small it might be, he did have a place in all this. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and turned to see that Xarric, too, was gazing up at the slowly rotating cynosure.
It really is something, isn't it?
The half-orc said quietly. A moment passed before he spoke again.
Well, I suppose we should get moving.
Craig nodded. They stared for another moment or two before making their way up the hall. Eventually, Xarric stopped in front of one of the archways. They had traveled halfway around the ring, now standing directly above where they had first appeared, though they could not see the spire circle from where they stood as the Immemorian hovered between the 2 points. Xarric motioned for Craig to enter.
This is where I leave you.
Craig gathered himself and stepped through the archway. He was in the office of Master Valzori. It was a quaint space, nothing like the wondrous place he had just come from. The office was a little stone room, warmly lit by a few well-placed candlesticks, with shelves lining the walls and a desk at the center of the room. A tall, cushioned chair sat behind the desk, and a smaller one in front of it. The office, though small, would have felt cozy, were it not for lack of a better word, clutter. The office was filled, wall to wall, with hundreds upon hundreds of hourglasses of different shapes and sizes. Some were beautiful and ornate, held by carved wood or gem-studded precious metals, while others were small and cheap, hastily made or old and worn. Some were barely the size of Craig's thumb, while others were almost the size of a small child. Contained within, Craig saw sand, powdered stone, pulverized eggshells, precious stones, oxidized metals, seeds, honey, molasses, and even live insects. They all flowed at different rates and were all at different levels, filling the room with a constant faint hissing sound as they trickled down. As Craig entered, the time ran out in an hourglass sitting directly in the center of Master Valzori's desk, and she moved it to the side. Craig had seen Master Valzori many times, either meeting with her or just passing her in the Hall of Time or the Academy. She was a tiefling with bright red skin, black hair pulled into a long braid, and tall black horns that faded to red around halfway up. Her rounded face, while soft, had a subtle sharpness to it, accentuated by her thin, arched eyebrows and her piercing eyes, which were solid yellow with no visible pupil. At first glance, she seemed scarcely over 20, but the subtle lines of her face and the way she carried herself betrayed her maturity and explained why she wore the thin cape that denoted her rank as a master. Craig knew her face well, but this was not the face that greeted him when he came into her office. Gray hair, not black, framed her face, which bore the wrinkles and cracks of an old woman. It was not the nimble and well-manicured fingers of a young woman that curled around the hourglass as she moved it, but rather the bony fingers of an old woman's liver-spotted hand. As she looked up at Craig, though, the sharp, cunning, yet strangely welcoming smile she gave him was unmistakable.
"Craig,"
she greeted, her once gentle and melodic voice now raspy and cracked.
"I'm grateful to have you join me."
Of course,
Craig said, once he found his voice.
Has something happened to you, Master?
Time. Nothing more. It is nothing you need to worry about at present.
What do you need of me?
There is something I need you to do. A mission I need you to undertake.
Master Valzori gave a slight cough before continuing.
This mission would be a solo mission, Craig. You would not be accompanied by other wardens as you have been on all your previous outings.
She coughed again.
Are you sure I'm ready?
Craig asked, stunned.
I've barely begun mastering the basics of what you have taught me.
You are ready,
Master Valzori affirmed, quieting Craig's protestations. She coughed again, then continued.
Do not concern yourself. It will be simple enough to start, though as with many things it will assuredly branch into a web of danger and chaos.
Another hourglass at the corner of her desk ran out, and she paused. She muttered an incantation that Craig didn't catch, and the hourglass rattled for a moment with an orange glow before separating into two smaller hourglasses. She tipped one over, starting its timer, then paused for a few seconds before repeating the action with the second one. She then turned her focus back to Craig.
There is a family of 3 dwarven brothers in the city of Neverwinter by the names of Nundro, Gundren, and Tharden Rockseeker. They are accompanied by a human warrior by the name of Sir Sildar Hallwinter.
She coughed again, this time a little harder than before, then continued.
Seek them out in the tavern known as the Ragged Ring. They are looking for sellswords to assist them in transporting a shipment of goods. You will travel there and join the group they are assembling.
That seems simple enough,
replied Craig.
It does.
Master Valzori nodded.
But we both know that things are never as simple as they seem. It is of vital import that you undertake this mission. I cannot, of course, tell you why. Things may not play out as they must if I were to do so. But I assure you that it is imperative that this mission plays out as necessity dictates.
If you are certain that this is the case, then of course I will accept,
Craig said without hesitation. He knew that the mission would probably be more dangerous than it seemed, but this was his chance to prove himself worthy of a place among the Wardens of Chronergy. This could earn him his ceremony of colors.
I'm very glad to hear it,
said Master Valzori.
The dwarves wish for all prospective enlistees to meet them at the Ragged Ring Tavern 7 days hence on the 25th of Myrtle. The city is less than a day's trek from here, but it would behoove you to arrive early and get your bearings.
You shall find me there in 6 days' time, then. I won't let you down.
Take this hourglass,
she said, holding one out to him.
When its time runs down, depart for Neverwinter. I look forward to hearing of your success.
I'll report back as soon as I've completed the mission,
Craig said, standing.
No.
Master Valzori held up her gaunt, wrinkled hand.
There is more to the mission than what I have informed you of. You shall be called back when your duties are complete.
Understood.
Good.
She rose and held out her hand, which Craig reached out and shook. It felt tiny and brittle, especially in his large, clawed hands.
I shall not keep you any longer. It was good to speak with you again, Craig. I wish you luck.
Thank you, Master,
Craig said, bowing. He then turned back to the archway. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched as another hourglass ran out of time as he stepped through. Blood dripped from Pepper's nose, the droplets causing the sand of the arena to stick together in little red clumps. She stumbled backwards as Dain drove his foot into her stomach, leaving her breathless and coughing for a moment. She recovered just in time to bring her arms up in a cross-block, just barely stopping Dain before he could make contact as he swung his fist down towards her. To an outside observer, she was clearly outmatched. The gnomish woman stood barely over 3 feet tall, and her opponent was a human man just under 6 feet of pure life muscle. They were right to some extent. She was outmatched, and she knew it, just not to the extent that it appeared. She knew her opponent. She had fought him several times before. They were both regular fighters at the Ragged Ring. That was how they both made their living, fighting each day, oftentimes multiple times in a day, for the entertainment of the patrons. His name was Dain. If he had a last name, he'd never offered it up. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Dain wasn't even his given name, but rather a nickname or an alias like Pepper's was. His short, spiky brown hair stood up from the top of his head, thick with grease and sweat. The sides had been sloppily shaved off, with several faint scars from where he had cut himself while doing so. He also bore several scars of the same nature along his crooked jaw, but they were mostly obscured by the growing stubble that he had yet to shave off. He wore only a pair of ragged brown trousers and a strand of gauze wrapped around his lower torso, preferring not to let clothing slow him down or give his opponents something to grab, and so his toned, muscular form was nearly fully on display, covered in bruises and scrapes. He had his fists raised defensively in front of him, guarding his face but ready to strike, and when he did, his training was evident. His attacks made up of quick, precise jabs to knock his opponents off balance, followed by heavy, powerful blows to take them down. He was, to put it simply, the epitome of a pugilist. Pepper was not. She was at a significant disadvantage when fighting with her fists, as her gnomish heritage deprived her of the long reach that most of her opponents had. For that reason, she preferred the comfort of weapons. A well-made warhammer could tip the scales in her favor, giving her the reach she needed without sacrificing the defensive advantage her size gave her, for that was indeed a factor too. True, her size made attacking harder, but it also made her harder to attack. If only she were nimble enough to make much use of that fact. Unfortunately, lacking any formal fight training, defense and avoidance were not her strong suit. Her strategy largely consisted of hitting things until they stopped hitting her back. With that in mind, it was a miracle she still looked as good as she did. Sure, she often sported her fair share of bruises, but she still had all her teeth, her nose remained straight and unbroken, her face bore no lasting scars. She didn't give it much thought usually, but she was, at least to this point, quite lucky when it came to her looks. She had a pale, round face, framed by a short, dark brown hair which she kept out of her face by way of a pink headband. She rarely wore makeup. There would hardly be a point to it, as it wouldn't stay on her face for very long anyways in her line of work, and the pink headband was largely hidden by her hair, so the only real splash of color in her countenance came from her bright cyan eyes. Pepper's clothing was more modest than Dain's, though not by much. She wore a bit more on the occasions when weapons were allowed, but this being a fistfight, she sported just an old pink shirt, a pair of light brown pants held up by a pink sash, and a pair of boots wrapped with pink gauze. Her hands, too, were wrapped with this pink gauze to protect them during the fight. It wouldn't exactly have been a challenge for an observer to guess her favorite color. Her name wasn't really Pepper. Her real name was SMEBBLA NACKLE. Pepper was just a nickname given to her by her mother when she was a child. Her little Pepper, small but full of fiery heat. It was that fiery heat, that intensity and eagerness to fight, that got her to her present situation, arms crossed over her head, holding back a blow from Dain. She took advantage of the leverage she had and flung Dain's arm to the side, at the same time sliding forwards between his legs. While she slid, as he began to pivot, she caught hold of his left ankle and swung herself around, jumping up and using his knee as a step in order to get up to his head, bringing her fist around in a haymaker to his jaw. By this time, he'd had time to react, and even as her fist made contact, he was already retaliating, bringing his left elbow up to hit her away. As she fell to the ground again, caught off guard by the elbow, he wiped some blood from his lip with the back of his hand, flicking it into the sand.
"Not bad,"
he grunted as she stood. He suddenly advanced, launching a series of quick jabs and kicks, only a few of which Pepper managed to block. She landed a few hits of her own, but for every attack of hers that made contact, 3 or 4 of Dain's did. She kicked him in the ankle, receiving a bloody nose and a bruised shoulder in return. Her well-placed uppercut was repaid with a welt on her bicep and what would later develop into a black eye. After a blow that she knew would give her a fat lip later, she managed to kick a leg out from under him, dropping him to one knee. She thought she had gained an advantage for a moment, only for Dain to lunge to the side, bringing his leg up as he went, knocking her to the ground alongside him. She kicked herself up to her feet, sending a fist forward into Dain's throat as he began to descend on her. He stumbled back, coughing, as Pepper took the chance to regain her bearings. Dain turned towards her, gasping out,
"Really? Right for the throat?"
"Yes, really?"
Pepper responded.
"Payback for the eye and the lip."
She knew she probably should have used that moment to her advantage. She was losing the fight, and they both knew it. She had managed to gain the upper hand for a moment, stunning her opponent. Under different circumstances, she would have used that opportunity to land a few good blows. Even if it wouldn't win her the fight, it would have at least made it less of a loss. But she was tired and sore, and so she gave herself the chance to recover, even though it meant letting Dain recover as well. A few seconds later, he had stopped gasping for breath, and she silently cursed herself for giving up that chance to attack him. She had essentially just conceded, and they both knew it. The fight didn't last much longer after that. They were both tired. Dain was still having trouble breathing from the blow to his throat, and Pepper was so exhausted and hurt that she was fighting with her own body as much as with Dain. She was honestly surprised that she held on for as long as she did, actually managing to block a few more attacks, but eventually a sharp blow to her temple dropped her. She might have blacked out for a moment, or she might have just been too exhausted and sore to pay attention to what was happening, but when she blinked open her eyes, Dain was standing over her, offering his hand as the crowd cheered for his victory.
"Well fought,"
he said, pulling her to her feet. Then he closed his mouth for a second, his cheek shifting as he felt something with his tongue. He winced and spat out a tooth into his hand.
"Shit, that'll be your handiwork."
"Oh, did I do that? Cool!"
Pepper said, excited to see that she had put up a better fight than she thought. After a moment, she realized what she had said and quickly added,
I mean, sorry about that."
"Come on,"
Dain said, reaching down to pat her on the back.
"I want to get a drink. You want something too?"
"Maybe. Not right now, though."
"Well, I'm buying now. I ain't buying later. So if you think you'll want something, better decide soon."
And with that, he limped out of the ring. Pepper followed, but split off from him in the common room. As he headed to the bar, receiving congratulations from patrons on the way over, Pepper made her way over to a table in the corner, sitting at which was another gnomish woman with nut-brown skin, shoulder-length sandy hair, and a pair of round-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. This other gnome, whose name was Lynette Fenpip, was one of Pepper's closest friends, and, as usual, had her nose buried in a book. She was a librarian by trade, though she hoped to someday become a famous author. As of yet, however, though she had started writing about 13 different books, she had finished and published exactly 0 of them. She would often read what she had written to Pepper as a means of peer review, but Pepper, ever the good friend, was perhaps not the best source of peer review, as she would always praise Lynette's works to the highest degree, whether they kept her enthralled the whole way through or lost her interest a minute in. Pepper had almost made it over to Lynette's table when she was stopped by the third and final gnome in the room, this one dressed in the uniform of an employee of the Ragged Ring. He was a scrawny, freckled gnome with short, messy, fiery red hair. His name was Reeve Tyrannil, and he was Pepper's best friend since childhood. When she'd had to leave Waterdeep, he was dead set on coming with her, and so the two had come to Neverwinter together. And when she'd taken up fighting at the Ragged Ring, he'd applied to be on the waitstaff. He now stopped in front of Pepper, setting down the tray he was carrying to place his hands on her shoulders.
"Oh, you was great in that. I mean, from what I saw anyhow. Couldn't see all of it, mind, since I was working and all. Didn't actually get started how it ended, but winning you was proper impressive."
He pulled her into a quick hug, then pushed her away, grabbing back up the tray.
"Right, I got to go take these here to a table and get back on the job, but I just wanted to say good on ya."
With that, he sped away, bearing the tray above his head before Pepper had a chance to get a word in. She chuckled to herself, then covered the rest of the distance to Lynette's table and pulled out one of the chairs. Lynette didn't look up or react at all until Pepper placed a hand on top of her book and tilted it down.
Oh, sorry. I got a bit lost in my writing. I can't figure out where to end this chapter. I keep writing and writing, but it doesn't seem to come to any good stopping point.
She slipped the book's ribbon bookmark between the pages as she closed it, slipping it into her bag before turning back to Pepper.
So, how'd the fight go?
Lynette, don't tell me you didn't see any of it.
She replied, putting on an exasperated tone, though she wasn't all that surprised, or all that upset for that matter.
You like what you like, and I like what I like. I far prefer to read about a fight than to watch it play out.
But if you watch it, then you can use what you see to write more interesting fights in your books.
They'd had this exact conversation many times over, and they both knew the outcome would be the same. So, rather than retreading the same old arguments once more, Lynette decided to change the subject.
Hey, so Pepper, have you ever thought about using your talents for more than pit fighting?
She asked suddenly.
What do you mean?
Pepper asked, caught off guard.
I don't know. Hired muscle, mercenary work, that kind of thing.
I mean, maybe, but you never really know what you're getting yourself into with that. Why do you ask?
Well...
Lynette reached into her bag, pulling out a little slip of paper which she handed over to Pepper.
I saw this, and I thought you might be interested.
Pepper took the paper from her and glanced over it. It was a Help Wanted poster. Based on the pinhole at the top, Lynette had taken it down from the nearby job board. Help Wanted, the paper read. Capable sorts desired to escort a wagon load of goods to the town of Phandelver. Must be able to defend from bandits/monsters/other roadside threats. Good pay. Possible further opportunities to follow. If interested, meet the Rockseeker brothers Tharden, Gundren, and Nundro at the Ragged Ring on the 25th of Myrtle for hiring and details.
Huh.
Pepper looked over the paper a few more times, considering.
I mean, there can't be any harm in hearing them out, right?
That was kind of what I was thinking.
Lynette replied, closing her bag up again and pushing up her glasses, which had started to slide down her nose after leaning over her bag several times.
I don't know. Maybe it won't be anything worth doing, but... well, it might be a good opportunity for you. And hey, it'll give you a chance to hit things with your hammer without having to hold back, so that should be fun for you.
That's all you needed to say.
Pepper joked.
I'll think on it. But right now, I'm gonna go get Dain to pay for a drink. Since he offered.
Fucking vampire!
ODRA hissed, stuffing her clothes into her bag.
He stepped a fight to get another finish and I get kicked out because of it?
It's not fair, but you shouldn't have taken the bait. He was goading you into it.
ODRA glanced over at her roommate, who had looked up from the book she was reading.
Looking for sympathy here, Clove. Not criticism.
Sorry.
Clove answered, glancing away.
I just meant...
Yeah, I know.
ODRA replied, picking up a book.
Is this your copy or mine?
I wrote my name on the first page of my copy.
Clove replied, turning back to the book she was currently reading.
Is my name in there?
ODRA flipped to the first page. A little curly Clove Lavinia was written there. She tossed the book onto Clove's desk, sighing.
Yes, so where's my copy?
I'm sure you'll find it, once your side of the floor is no longer covered in dirty clothes.
The two had been assigned as roommates at Neverwinter Academy when they had enrolled, and, both having been first-year students studying magic, had had many of the same classes. Somehow, though, despite being around each other so much and being so different, they became good friends. This was an unlikely development for several reasons, but certainly not unwelcome. The two were indeed very different. ODRA was a sea elf, hailing from the underwater city of Urenlin, and was several decades into her 2nd century of life. Her hair, which was cut short on the back but left longer in the front, was a silvery white that faded to a pale blue at the tips. This little hint of blue complemented her cyan, freckled skin, which itself complemented her sea-green eyes. Her fashion choices, a ratty old leather coat which was slightly too big for her, pulled over a cute but comfortable thrown-together outfit of green, reflected well the state of her side of the room, which in turn reflected her personality. Chaotic, disorganized, and combative. ODRA's lifelong dream had been to become a wizard. When she'd finally had the chance to leave home and enroll at Neverwinter Academy, she'd seized it without hesitation. However, learning magic wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Hours of studying and memorization was not exactly her strong suit, and neither was adhering to rules and protocol. Clove, on the other hand, was a young human girl, just 18 years of age, though her 19th birthday was only a few months off, with long brown hair which hung in her face, pale skin choked with freckles, and piercing purple eyes. She was practically ODRA's perfect opposite in personality. She wore a brown robe and a wide-brimmed, pointy hat, both with highlights of dark blue, and adorned her outfit with a number of little charms and pieces of jewelry, all stylized to look like stars. Despite her young age, she exhibited far more responsibility, burying herself in her studies and spending every free moment with her focus either buried in a book or gazing up at the stars. And so, to no one's surprise, Clove was one of the top students in her year, close to graduating after only 2 years of study, and ODRA was now being kicked out of the academy for starting a fight with another student, a snobby rich kid named Vanfear Midwick, whose family had a great deal of sway over what happened at the academy thanks to their significant financial contributions.
You could come with me, you know.
ODRA suggested to Clove as she packed.
Get out there, see the world. We could find somebody else to teach us magic and not have to learn while pent up in this place.
I'll pass.
Clove replied, amused.
Maybe someday, but I like studying here. You should probably hurry up with the packing, by the way. It's almost sundown, and they said that if you're not out by midnight, they'll punish you further.
What more can they do? They've already kicked me out.
ODRA laughed, but she did start to pack faster. She didn't know what more they could do to punish her, but she figured it wouldn't be wise to find out. Eventually, ODRA finished her packing. Despite the mess that she had managed to make of her side of the room, she didn't actually have all that many belongings to speak of. She just had a knack for spreading them out in such a disorganized manner that it seemed like she did. The only possessions she'd really seen fit to bring with her from Urenlin were a few changes of clothes, some money, and a dagger with which to defend herself if the need arose. Everything else she had picked up along the way, a long leather coat and a small crossbow gifted to her by the first mate of the ship she had traveled on, a custom-made spellbook gifted to her by the only teacher who'd actually supported and helped her, a guest instructor named Professor Albrecht, a collection of textbooks she'd smuggled out of a library because she didn't want to buy her own, and a few other little knickknacks and trinkets besides. And so, with her bags packed, there was nothing left to do but say goodbye to her friend. She had been dreading this part. In the 129 years of her life, Clove was the first real friend ODRA had ever made. And now she stood before her, having to bid her farewell until who knows when.
Well, I'll try to keep in touch. I don't really know where I'll be going, so I can't really give you an address to write, but at least I know where to find you.
Please take care of yourself. You won't have me around to keep you from making stupid choices.
Clove said, an earnest plea within her mockery. ODRA suddenly pulled the younger girl into a hug. It only lasted a few seconds before she pushed Clove away from her again, shouldering her bag and turning to the door, so Clove couldn't see her eyes welling up.
You too.
Was all she could manage before she walked out. She made her way down the halls of the academy, eventually coming to the grand entrance of the building, where she was met by 2 individuals here to see her off. She immediately recognized Professor Harvin Lanthier, standing there with a smug expression on his face. One of the most respected professors among teachers, and least respected among students, Professor Lanthier was one of the strictest and cruelest members of the Academy staff, and had taken a particular disliking to ODRA. Perhaps it was due to her work ethic, or lack thereof, or maybe it was because of her rivalry with Vanfear Midwick, who was one of Lanthier's favorite students. Whatever the cause, ODRA suspected that he stood here today solely for the satisfaction of watching her leave. She didn't care. She was so far beyond caring what he thought. What hurt her more was the expression on the face of the other professor waiting for her. Professor Beryg Ixalum was an old, balding, gnomish man who most days sported a kindly smile on his face. He genuinely cared about each and every student of the academy, and did his best to make sure they all knew it. For this reason, the look he now greeted her with, full of disappointment, cut ODRA to the core.
Professor,
ODRA began, but he held up a hand to stop her.
ODRA, my dear girl, there is no need for any more apologies. You've already said your piece, and the decision has already been made. There is nothing to be done about it now. I wish you greater luck in your future endeavours, and I do so hope you don't make the same mistakes.
ODRA nodded and made her way to the door, stopping when Professor Lanthier spoke up, seemingly unable to resist one last snide comment.
Farewell, Miss Ixalum.
He lingered on her last name, on the original Aquan pronunciation of it before she had chosen to change it. She hated that pronunciation, and he knew it well.
Perhaps you'll take this expulsion as a lesson, and mind yourself in the future. For some reason, though, I doubt it.
Yeah? Oh, here's a lesson for you. Once you expel somebody, there's nothing to keep them from telling you to go fuck yourself. Kiss my bitas!
ODRA shot back at him, middle finger raised high as she strode out, still laughing to herself. She had been wanting to do that for ages. Where would she go? She didn't have anywhere to stay. She supposed maybe she could find an inn to stay at, but that would get expensive fast. She needed a job. Neverwinter was a big city. Surely there would be plenty of jobs up for offer. There were job boards posted all around the city where people could put up flyers with requests for work. She just needed to check out the nearest one. And so she did. She tracked down a nearby job board and skimmed through its postings. She picked up a few here and there over the next couple of days, helping move furniture around, washing a store's windows, pet-sitting for a day. But the most she got from any of them was a few silver pieces. All of the jobs that paid real money required real skills, skills that she didn't have. That was, until she caught sight of a flyer put up by a trio of brothers by the name of Rockseeker, escorting a wagon load of goods to Phandelver. Phandelver. That sparked something in her memory. Hadn't Professor Albrecht said that he would be seeing to some business there after the semester that he had taught? Perhaps she could track him down. He was the only professor whose instruction had truly helped ODRA. Maybe she could get him to resume her wizard training. Good pay, the flyer read. It didn't specify what that meant exactly, but given the nature of the job, she assumed it had to be more than the coppers and silvers she had been scrounging together the past few days. She yanked the flyer down and pocketed it.
See something you like?
Asked a gruff voice from beside her. She jumped, quickly turning to see a tough-looking human man with a shaven scalp and a scraggly stubble that could really use the same treatment.
Not interested.
ODRA said flatly, turning to walk away.
Think you got me mistaken, what with my intents and the like. I ain't looking for a cheap lay if that's what you're thinking,
the man said. This did little to slow ODRA's departure, so the man decided to tip his hand a little.
No, I'm here for something else, ESKALUS.
That brought ODRA to a halt. That, or the fact that she'd just noticed another man emerging from an alleyway ahead of her and exchanging a glance with the one behind her.
That is your name, ain't it?
The man prompted.
Depends who's asking.
ODRA replied, trying to keep her voice level.
Guess that's a yes, Dain. Wouldn't much depend on much if it wasn't your name, now would it?
ODRA silently cursed. She should have just said no, instead of trying to be cool and mysterious.
What do you want?
She asked, noting a third figure, this one a short, muscle-bound woman with red-tipped hair and a snake tattooed along her arm, approaching from down the other street. Both of her paths were now blocked.
Fella by the name of Vanfear wanted me and my mates to deliver a message to you.
The man was still just leaning against the job board, not having bothered to chase after her. His companions, though, were slowly drawing closer.
Oh, that asshole? You know, if he wanted his ass beat again, he could have just asked me in person. I would have been happy to comply. There's no need for all this formality.
That dry chuckle of his was really starting to get on ODRA's nerves.
Ain't nothing formal about us, missy.
At this, he finally pushed off the job board and started walking towards her. ODRA noted, with dismay, that she should have waited until later in the day to come here. It was early yet, and the streets were all but empty.
I don't suppose he bothered to write down his message? No offense, but you don't seem like the type to commit something like that to memory.
She already knew the answer, but was hoping to stall him and keep him talking. In retrospect, she probably shouldn't have thrown in the insult if she wanted any hope of that working.
Wasn't the kind of message what uses words and the like,
the man said, eyes glinting.
And don't you worry your pretty little head. I remember it just fine.
And with that, his fist came swinging up towards her face. She was expecting it, but even so, she reacted a bit too late, his knuckles clipping her jaw and sending her stumbling backwards. She tried to reach for her dagger, but the woman with the snake tattoo grabbed her by the wrist and twisted her arm up behind her back. As the other man approached, this one looked like he could probably use glasses with the way he was squinting, ODRA brought her foot up, kicking him squarely in the groin. He grunted, stumbling forward to punch her in the gut in the split second before the pain really kicked in. Then it did, though, and he doubled over in agony. He wasn't the only one to do so, though, as his blow had knocked the wind out of ODRA. She desperately gasped for breath as the man with the shaven head swung his fists once, twice, 3 times into her face. She didn't have time to recover, not in this position. She jerked her head back, slamming it into the face of the woman holding her, yanking her arm away as the woman's grip briefly loosened. In that split second of opportunity, she spun around and flung her hands out, hoping desperately for something. And something happened. A beam of light blasted from her hands, slamming into the woman's chest, sending her flying backwards. ODRA stepped back, stunned. She had never managed to conjure that powerful of an offensive spell in all her time at Neverwinter Academy. The first thug, the one with the shaven head, noticed her hesitation, though, and seized the opportunity to slam his fist directly into her nose. Blood began pouring from both nostrils, though thankfully it didn't feel like he managed to break her nose. Not that she would have noticed if he had, as the punch was still forceful enough to knock her off her feet and was swiftly followed up by a kick to her ribs. The squinting man had somewhat recovered by that point and joined the man with the shaven head in kicking her while she was down. ODRA tried to crawl away, to push herself to her feet, to do something, but it was all she could do to curl into a ball and try to protect herself, almost choking on the blood and tears flowing into her mouth. She saw the woman pushing herself to her feet as well. Her 2 assailants were about to become 3 once more. Breathing labored and hitching, limbs shaking weakly, gagging on the blood from her nose, ODRA desperately forced herself to her feet, desperately prayed for a bit more magic to manifest. Then, suddenly, the 3 attackers paled, staring at her in horror, and then miraculously they all turned and ran. The squinty man clawing at his eyes, the bald man screaming like a frightened child, and the woman tripping over her own feet. ODRA didn't understand. At least, she didn't understand until she looked down at herself and saw the quickly dissipating illusion that had altered her appearance, giving her the likeness of a horrifying, ghoulish version of herself. She was grateful for the lack of a mirror nearby, as she couldn't see the full extent of whatever this spell had briefly done to her appearance.
Guess I'm not so bad of a wizard after all.
She rasped weakly.
Take that, Professor Lamp.
Her voice gave out as her legs did, and she collapsed to the ground in a small puddle of her own blood, vision fading. She clung to her consciousness as best she could, but it faded quickly, leaving her with one thought before it departed her entirely. She could do real magic. Now she just needed a mentor. Phandelin. Professor Albrecht. The old man was mad. Of that there was no doubt. There was, however, at least some comfort to be found in the fact that he was aware of it. Something in his mind had snapped. Something had broken that he doubted could ever be fixed. What he did not know was when it had happened. Had the mind broken with the magic, or had the broken mind led to the broken magic? Had his mind broken because he chose to leave, or had he chosen to leave because his mind was broken? Whatever the case may be, he now stepped, for the first time in ages, out of the darkness of his tower and into the light of the sun, its rays of gentle warmth feeling like fire on his pale skin. Well, perhaps not quite like fire. He knew all too well what that felt like, and the burn scars covering his entire body ensured that he would never forget it. The streets of Neverwinter looked quite different from how he remembered them, although, reflecting on it further, it had been so long that he wasn't sure he really did remember them. He knew they didn't look quite like this, though, back when he had seen them before. Evidently the rest of the world had kept moving while he had been holed up in his tower. Despite the sun's spring heat, he felt a little cold as he made his way through the bustling crowds. He had shed his usual robes in favor of a much more revealing outfit, just a few pieces of cloth, much akin to the attire of berserkers, for, indeed, that was the role he now intended to try his hand at. He just needed a weapon to suit his purposes. That need was easily met. It was not a challenge to find a good weaponsmith in the city, and he had been sure to leave his tower with enough gold in his pockets to pay for a heavy bronze maul. With that need met, only one remained: the need for a drink. After all, he would need something to bolster his courage, and so he eventually came to a raucous and rowdy tavern, the sign out front proclaiming it to be the Ragged Ring. This seemed like a good place to satisfy his newfound tastes, so he made his way in, found a seat at the bar, and began to drink his fill. Several drinks in, he reflected that perhaps he should have brought a bit more money with him when he left his tower, but again, there was nothing to be done about it now. He may as well just open up a tab. He was making quick work of his fourth pint of ale when he heard the tavern door open again, and decided to glance over, only to be faced with what simply had to be a ghost walking into the building. He knew that face well, but certainly it couldn't actually be him. He couldn't actually be walking into the tavern alive and well, could he?
Holy shit, is that you, Eldrick?
The old man cried out, leaping up and spilling the rest of his drink in the process. He paid it little mind as he ran over to the fiery-haired and bearded dwarf that now walked in. Before the dwarf could respond, the old man had pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down into the old man's waist-length white beard.
Holy fuck, I thought you were dead!
Who the... Get off me!
The dwarf shouted, shoving the old man, who now saw that the dwarf was not alone, but rather was accompanied by two other dwarves who bore a strong resemblance to the first, as well as a human man who, though he was certainly getting on in years, was nowhere near as old as the mad, white-bearded one.
What, you don't recognize me? I mean, it has been a few hundred years, so that's understandable.
The old man stepped back.
Plus, I usually dressed a bit different.
First off, no, I don't recognize you. And second...
But the dwarf couldn't finish his sentence before the old man started talking again.
You look the same. I'm Old Man Elmer. You don't remember me? We used to adventure together. Back, we were the
Second,
the dwarf continued.
My name's not Hildrig. That was Mida.
The thread or something. What was it again? Oh yeah, the golden thread. That was it.
Old Man Elmer continued. Then he paused, seeming to have finally registered that the dwarf had said something.
What did you say?
Hildrig. That's Mida.
The dwarf's tone was considerably less hostile now, as it seemed he did at least finally recognize Elmer.
What? No way, it hasn't been that long.
Elmer laughed.
You almost had me, though. Don't mess with me like that.
Oh, my name's Gundren. These here are my brothers.
Gundren explained, gesturing behind him.
Well, except in the human. He's just a friend.
What? Oh, shit. Gundren! I remember. Oh my gods, I remember when you were just a little baby boy.
Elmer exclaimed.
Where's your father at, anyways?
They're dead, last I checked. Weren't you the one that delivered that news to me, Ma?
Gundren asked, a bit confused. At this point, one of Gundren's brothers, an extremely fat dwarf that Elmer vaguely remembered being named Tharden, interjected.
On that same topic, how aren't you dead? You're human. Humans aren't supposed to live that long.
Well, that's rude,
Elmer scolded. At this point, the human man that accompanied the dwarven brothers stepped forward.
Is this man bothering you?
Though his question was directed at Gundren, the man's fierce eyes never left Elmer. Elmer, however, did not pick up on the question's intent.
No, he's fine,
he replied to the question that was not asked of him.
He's not bothering me.
I was not talking to you, old man,
the man answered, hand on the hilt of a sword at his hip.
Rude! Haven't you ever heard of respecting your elders?
Certainly. I respect elders who respect the man that I am charged with the protection of. Who are you?
I'm Old Man Elmer. Weren't you listening?
Gundren stepped between them.
Sildar. He's someone my father knew. Back when he was alive.
Some guy he knew? I'll have you know they used to sing my name in the chapels.
Elmer snapped.
I was a great adventurer with your father. We went on many a quest.
You lot, you have fun with the madman, alright, lads?
The third dwarven brother said, patting Gundren on the shoulder as he started off towards the bar.
Me? I'm getting myself a drink.
I was one of the greatest wizards. My name was known even by denizens of the other planes. I studied the arcane arts for hundreds of years. I've done crazy shit you wouldn't believe.
Elmer stopped to take a breath. He was wearing himself out with all his ranting. Gundren turned to Sildar again, waving to him to stand down.
I wouldn't worry about it. I think he's just a bit senile, is all.
Not senile, just insane.
Elmer quickly corrected.
It's, okay. You see how that's worse, right?
Gundren asked.
Yep, especially because they didn't really have any good medication to help with that back then. Back here. Back now. What year is it again?
1486 DR?
Tharden answered, looking to Gundren with a look of confusion, which Gundren returned with a shrug.
Yeah, probably not then.
Okay, I don't even know what you're saying. What's with the hammer, if you don't mind me asking? Thought you said you were a wizard.
Gundren asked, gesturing to Elmer's bronze maul.
Oh, well, you know, after the whole thing with your father and how that didn't work out. Well, that's a long story, but I figured I'd drop the old magic thing and try my hand at a more barbaric style of adventuring.
Elmer said, hoisting the maul over his shoulder. Despite his age, he was surprisingly muscular.
How's that going for you?
Tharden asked.
I mean, I've only just started, but it seems good so far. I may be old, but you're never too old to try new things,
Elmer said, attempting to twirl his maul and accidentally sending it crashing into a nearby table.
Shit! Sorry, I'll fix that.
He muttered an arcane phrase, performing the necessary somatic movements, and... nothing.
Oh, right. Game of magic. Forget about that. Guess I won't fix it. Hey, you guys want to grab a drink?
The woman behind the bar glared at him, but, being in a tavern whose main draw was the fighting ring in the center, it seemed she was used to destruction in the common rooms, as she didn't press the issue further.
Oh, why the hell's not?
Gundren said, heading over to the bar with Elmer. Tharden beckoned to Sildar, following along behind. Sildar, for his part, seemed less than pleased at the prospect of a drink with this deranged old man, but if Elmer noticed his displeasure, he didn't show it. Sildar doubted he noticed it.
Hey, you said you were intending to do some adventuring, yeah?
Gundren asked Elmer as they sat down.
I got a job I'm recruiting for, and, well, you seem to be somewhat lacking in the upstairs department. Someone with a hammer as big as that one could be quite helpful.
Color me intrigued! I was looking for an adventure to go out swinging on. What do you got for me, laddie? Whippersnapper? Kiddo? Pal? Buckaroo?
Elmer likely would have gone on calling Gundren by different names had Gundren not begun to speak.
It's an escort mission. I got this cartload of goods.
Gundren started, before Elmer interrupted.
An escort mission?
He exclaimed, astonished.
Boy, I don't know what kind of business you're getting into, but you should have listened to your father more.
Not that kind of...
Gundren tried to explain, but Elmer wasn't finished.
But hey, my disapproval aside, I appreciate that you think I still got it.
He flexed his muscles, trying to emulate a heroic pose.
Not that kind.
Gundren said before Elmer could say any more.
There are multiple definitions of the word escort, you know.
Yeah, probably. What's your point?
Oh, for the love of... I've got a cartload of goods. Or I will have a cartload of goods in a few days' time. And I need it to be brought somewhere. I'm paying a group of people to escort it and make sure that it arrives there safely.
How much are you paying?
At this point, Tharden interjected.
The price we're looking at is 10 gold per person. That should be sufficient payment based on the length of the trip.
Eh, that's not much.
Elmer shrugged.
But hey, I don't care much. At my age, I'll probably keel over and die out there on the road anyways. I'll do it.
Aye, that's the spirit,
Tharden said, chuckling and returning to his drink.
All right. Well, I'll be meeting with anyone who's taking the job tomorrow night in this very tavern. Just come back here tomorrow night and we can sign you on to the job.
Gundren said, after a moment of processing what Elmer had said.
Yeah, sure, I'll be here.
Elmer agreed, taking a swig from his drink.
Hey, speaking of your age, if you don't mind me asking, shouldn't you be, dead by now? Tharden asked you earlier and you didn't really give an answer. I don't mean any offense by the question, but...
Time's relative, if you really think about it.
Elmer replied, waving his hand dismissively.
Yeah, I don't think that,
What? I'm only 400. Don't you dwarves live to like 700 years or something?
Nay. We only lived around 350 or so.
Oh, that was elves. It's been a while since I talked to either.
Elmer took another sip of his drink, beer now dribbling down into his long beard.
But regardless, you're a human. Humans ain't supposed to live that long.
You learn some things when you do the whole magic gig, and since I'm not doing the whole magic gig anymore, that's why I'll probably die out there.
I suppose so.
Gundren agreed hesitantly.
Barkeep, another round.
Coming right up,
the bartender replied, filling another mug with beer for each of them.
Oh, alcohol, one of the few good things I have left in my life,
Elmer said, raising his mug into the air.
If I'm going to be going out in a blaze of glory, I sure as hells am not going to be sober when I do.
The mage sat in darkness. He was not blinded by it, however. It was his element. He had lived in it all his life. Light blinded him far more than darkness ever had. He fingered the black stone hung from a chain around his neck. Its very existence troubled him, and yet there may yet be a way to prosper from it, to avert the coming catastrophe, instead turning it to something that may benefit him. He heard footsteps approaching, and pointed to a nearby candle, muttering a few syllables under his breath. A flame sprang to life on the candle's wick, momentarily blinding him. He stared above the candle, watching a few spiders scurry away as he let his eyes adjust to the light. He knew the approaching footsteps. The person that was coming to his chamber would bring a light with him. The mage could not allow himself to be blinded even for a moment by that light. He could not show that weakness. Better to prepare himself. A few moments later, the door swung open, and there he stood, a drow, charcoal gray skin and pointed ears, with his hair pulled back into braids. He wore a purple cloth over his mouth and a gray shawl over his leather armor. He carried with him a lit oil lantern.
Sir, the goblin scouts you've sent out have reported back. They say that a trio of dwarven brothers of the name Rockseeker claim to have found the mine,
the drow said.
They're leaving for Phandelver in a few days' time.
Excellent. Thank you, Vhalak, my friend,
said the mage.
Send word to Clark. Have him ready as archers. The web is spun. Time to catch a few flies.
Thank you for listening to Chapter 1 of Zero Charisma, Phandelver and Below, featuring, in order of appearance, Jerry Talsma, aka Frosty the Snowpickle, as the narrator, Professor Beryg Ixalum, the Black Spider, Dain, the Greeter, Sir Sildar Hallwinter, and Tanen Tautbone, Colin Jeter as Maverith Deadshot Avergaith, Creator Capes as Tharden Rockseeker, Vhalak, and Xarric, Matt, aka ROCDE, as Gundren Rockseeker and Nundro Rockseeker, Colin Wood, aka Regular Gummy Bear, as Dennis El Remedios Cipriano de la Santisima Ruiz y Picasso III, Rachel Young as Lynette Fenpip and Mila Relevin, Zentillo as Craig, Disciple of the Continuum, Jenica Jenick as Krenin Hale and Reeve Tyrannil, Amanda Lillis as Master Valzori, Ellie, aka Volti, as SMEBBLA Pepper NACKLE, Amelia Hermes as ODRA ESKALUS, Hannah as Clove Lavinia, Jim McGovern as Professor Harvin Lanthier, Shane Chris, aka Sean Saxum, as Old Man Elmer. Adaptation written by Jerry Talsma. Intro and outro themes and musical interludes written and recorded by Jerry Talsma. Until next time, dear listeners.